to another edition of the Hardwood Huddle, our season premiere, and we are breaking down the big trade between the Toronto Raptors and the New Jersey Nets from December 17th, 2004. My name is Randy Zellea from the Hardwood Huddle, joined by Bill Ingram from backsportspage.com. Right now, we are going to go to the breakdown of the trade with Doug Smith from the Toronto Star, and Iannazzon, who used to cover the New Jersey Nets for the Bergen Record back in the day. So that four of us are going to break down this trade, every aspect. All four of us were involved in some part of Vince's career, covering Vince's career. I was a very integral part of the Nets back in that time. Al was covering the Nets, and Doug was covering the Toronto Raptors. And we broke down every detail of this move. I hope you guys enjoy it. This is the season premiere of the Hardwood Huddle. All right, we're back here on the Hardwood Huddle. Two very special guests with us right now. The man who's been covering the Toronto Raptors, I think, more years than he would like to remember. Doug Smith joins the show right now. Of course, from the New York metropolitan area, used to cover the New Jersey Nets, now covers the New York Jets. Iannazzon. Gentlemen, thanks for giving us a few minutes today. I really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
So the topic today is Vince Carter being traded from the Toronto Raptors to the New Jersey Nets. Both of you guys were there covering your respective teams at that time. Just to give a little bit of a background, Toronto traded for Vince Carter from Golden State back on draft night and sort of hit the ground running. Doug, can you talk about the beginning, the first few years of Vince Carter, what was like for him in Toronto?
It was great. He gave the franchise legitimacy in the NBA and in the basketball world. He was its best player. David Sotomayor was pretty good, but he was not Vince Carter. The dunk contest in 2001, the Sydney Olympics were coming out not just for Vince, but for the Toronto Raptors. He gave them a profile they never had before.
And going into the 01-02 season, when the Nets finally started taking off a little bit, when Jason Kidd came there, it was around that time, the season after the Raptors knocked out the Knicks in the first round of the playoffs, and things started going, I don't want to say bad, but the seams were starting to come off a little bit in Toronto. What was going on around that time, that time period?
Well, there was, obviously the year that they played Philly, 2001 in the conference semifinals, beat the Knicks and went to 7 games with the Sixers team that went to the NBA Finals. That was a high point. And then, Vince got hurt a bunch. His knee started to bother him. The team, they re-signed everybody the next year. Alvin Williams, Jerome Williams, Antonio Davis. They brought in Hakeem Olajuwon. It was, they were going to make a move, and it just didn't work out. Vince got hurt, and I think he missed a bunch of games. And it was, by 03-04, they were sort of transitioning to a different era, and it was going to be the Chris Bosh era.
I don't like to be reminded that Hakeem played for Toronto, because the player that wore number 34 in Toronto was not Hakeem Olajuwon.
they brought Hakeem Olajuwon in, forgot to ask him whether he liked his head coach and Lenny Wilkins, and the answer was no. And it was a horrible, horrible mistake.
I got to tell you, Carol Dawson, right before he retired, I sat down with him in his office and did a lengthy interview that spawned many articles for years to come. And one of them was him, the extent to which he tried to talk Hakeem out of, he's like, please retire. You're back. You can't play. You're not going to be able to play like you're used to playing. If we thought you could play, we'd keep you here. Just retire. Let us send you out in style. Lifetime Houston Rocket. And of course, he didn't do that.
Yeah. The Raptors gave him a third year, which was a big deal at that time. The third year in the contract, and I don't think he lasted a year and a half. He was obviously, he had 20 good games at the end of his last year in Houston, and that's what the Raptors kind of signed him on. It was a terrible overpay and just a terrible mistake. But that was the start of the denouement of the Vince Carter era.
But you said something that was interesting, which is Vince giving the Raptors legitimacy in the basketball world. Is that I don't know the political difference between Vancouver. I mean, I know the difference, but the political difference in terms of why is Vince maybe the reason that basketball made it in Toronto, where the Grizzlies did not have a transformative player, and the people of Vancouver just kind of went, let's watch hockey.
It was a part of it. The Raptors obviously became a global phenomenon with Vince, but I think the issue in Vancouver was ownership, and they were never, ever really settled. Even the first group, Arthur Griffiths and his group, really didn't have the staying power you need to have to sustain the first 4 or 5 years of franchise. When it's going to go south, things are going to get screwed up. You're going to lose a ton of money, and they didn't have the stomach or the pockets to withstand that anticipated lull.
And Al, from the Nets' perspective, I know Steve Adamick was with the team for a little bit, and you came on, I believe, during the 03-04 season, right around that time with Kenyon's last year. The Nets were cooking.
I came on the next year. I came on 04-05. That was my first year. I was going back and forth with the Knicks and the Nets.
Okay. Around that time, the Nets were still rolling up until they got eliminated from against Detroit in that and had the great double overtime classic. Went up 3-2 and then lost the next 2 games to Detroit. And boom, Kenyon Martin. Kenyon Martin goes to sign with Denver, and they do the sign and trade with Denver for 3 draft picks. Kerry Kittles gets shipped off to LA, plays 2 games and retire. And the Nets, I guess the core group of the Nets is gone, and what's remaining from the championship teams are some of the role players like Jason Collins and Aaron Williams, and left is an injured Jason Kidd, who missed the first month of the 04-05 season, and Richard Jefferson, who was left sort of carrying the load. And towards the end of the 03-04 season, and me being around the team around that point, Jason and Kenyon missed a little bit during the season, and Richard sort of carried the team and still made a strong run in the playoffs. So Rod Thorne rewarded Richard Jefferson with a contract extension, but meanwhile Kenyon found himself, like we said, heading to Denver via trade. Kerry's gone, leaving a hole. Alonzo Mourning didn't want to be there, was in and out of the lineup with his ailment. So pick us up, Al, from when you started with the team back in 04-05. What was going on with the Nets?
Yeah, I mean, what you just said, it was a fire sale. They had just Bruce Ratner was taking over, and he was getting rid of players. When they didn't resign Kenyon, who got $91 million, then they let Kerry go. They gave Richard $78 million. Jason Kidd was not happy. He was not rushing back from this knee surgery because, remember, they had been to the finals 2 straight years. Then they lost in Game 7 to the Pistons in the conference semis when Jason had no knee whatsoever. He needed knee surgery. He had nothing in his knee. And I mean, we were all on Jason Kidd watch at that point. Like, he had just come back. They were below 500. We knew how temperamental he was, and he wasn't happy. So we're like, December 15th comes. Are they going to trade Jason Kidd? We know he's miserable. He wants to be on a winner. And the Nets are going in a different direction. And then out of the blue, it really was out of the blue. I mean, I'm sure Doug will tell you, everybody was saying Vince was going to Portland. It was out of the blue that they got in and they made the trade for Vince. And that changed things for the Nets, for Jason Kidd. They stuck together for a few more years.
Yeah, Portland was out there for sure. That would seem to be one of the favorite landing spots. And we thought if they were going to trade him, they would trade him west because they don't want him to beat him 4 times in a year, right, which makes entire sense. The funny thing is, the night the trade happened, we were in Indianapolis, and as soon as we heard it, we thought, okay, the Raptors are going to get Jason Kidd because that's the kind of value Vince Carter should have brought.
Right.
And we knew Kidd. Everybody in the league knew Kidd was unhappy, and like Al said, he was not coming. He was veteranly rehabbing that knee, and he could have taken until March if they hadn't made the trade. But when we heard that, the first thing I thought of was, they got Jason Kidd. Interesting. As it turns out, not quite true.
No, they got the great Alonzo Mourning.
They got Alonzo Mourning's contract for sure. Now, Alonzo Mourning was never coming to Toronto. It was mainly cap ballast. The Toronto doctors were never going to clear a guy with his kidney ailment to play. The Toronto medical staff is uber careful. And as soon as we heard the name Alonzo Mourning, it was, okay, what's the buyout number? Because the medical staff was never going to let him play in Toronto.
Right.
Aaron Williams,
Eric Williams.
Eric Williams, the draft pick that became Joey Graham. That's like 8 cents on the dollar for Vince Carter.
Yeah. And Alonzo was going to Miami. Everybody knew he was going to Miami.
Yeah,
he was going back there, and he got his ring.
Yeah. And the funny thing was, Eric Williams was almost like fool's gold because Lawrence was such a stickler for that motion offense that Eddie and Michael Korn had put into place while they were still, a championship contender. Eric Williams thrived in Lawrence's system. He was averaging almost 20 points a game that year and became almost like the centerpiece for the immediate trade at that point. And then obviously when he went back to Toronto, he was nowhere near that because he was a product of the system, not about his talent at that point.
And the Raptor system was weird. That was a very odd team. And Vince, he probably didn't comport himself greatly in the first 20 games, but that team had Jalen Rose, Rafer Alston, and it was knucklehead central for a lot of parts. And it was a hard mix to come into. So, there were flaws in that roster that went far beyond whether Vince was going to be there at the end of the year or not. Because
but Skip was a heck of a dribbler.
Skip and Jalen, I remember watching a basketball game in Charlotte or Atlanta, one of the places where you sat front row. They spent an entire game not passing the ball to each other. I swear to goodness, Jalen, if he had to pass the ball to Skip to run a play, would run it through Morris Peterson. Or if Skip had the ball and he had to get it to Jalen, it would go through. They would not pass the ball to each other. 40-minute basketball game. It was the most fascinating Raptor game, one of the most fascinating Raptor games I ever saw.
We talk a lot about culture, and one of my favorite general managers, he's an assistant general manager right now, but when David Morway was building the Raptors around Paul George and Roy Hibbert, that group, and they were so good. If the Spurs hadn't advanced to the finals that year when the Pacers were playing Miami, I think the Pacers would have beaten Miami. But when Tim Duncan and Greg Popovich got into the finals, they knew they couldn't have another small market team with people that don't talk. So they had to make sure they got LeBron in. But that team, that culture, that aspect of, David and I used to sit courtside in different places talking about how you build a winning basketball team. And I think the cultural aspect is the thing that we often see short-sighted or shortchanged in the interest of chasing, big names and whatnot, instead of spending time. Look at Utah. David's the assistant general manager in Utah right now, and they are all about culture. And when you look at the success that they're having, very much like the Pacers did, I think people underestimate this in an era where we play 2K, which is great. I play 2K. I'm sure you play a lot, Doug. And it all works so easily, but when you're trying to do it in real life, those personality issues like you're talking about play a huge role in the success of teams.
Yeah, I think the thing with Vince back then, I think he was playing for his fourth head coach and third general manager in 6 years. That's a lot of and different kind of guys. He spent a year. He was with Butch Carter, he was with Lenny Wilkins, he was with Sam Mitchell. Glenn Grunwald was the GM, and Brian Colangelo was the GM, and finally was Rob Babcock. I would want out of town too.
Yeah,
because it was a constant. He probably played for I think he played for 5.5 years. He probably played with 120 teammates. It's crazy. There was no consistency here. They had 2 very good years, 2000, 2001 when they had that run. And then it was just time for him to go, for all concerned, him especially.
And Doug, look what he came to too, because it wasn't his team; it was Jason's team. Every day, and I say this all the time. I did it with the Knicks too. We always took Carmelo's temperature every single day. Every single day, we took Jason. We never took Vince Carter's temperature.
And he would have loved that. Vince would have loved that.
But
it perfectly suited his personality.
He was a great secondary star.
100%.
Even though he was probably the most talented guy on the team. Well, just athletic. Jason Kidd was a tremendous player. But Vince, we know what he could do.
Yeah.
The way he could take over game scoring, Jason took over game every way possible. So it was just the right situation for him, and he blossomed as the season went on. And, Randy, you remember this. Richard Jefferson got hurt. Other guys got hurt. They ended the season with like Jabari Smith, Rodney Buford,
Oh God,
Travis Best, Brian Scalabrine starting at small forward because Richard was hurt.
Yep.
And they went 15-4 at the end of the season to make the playoffs. And Vince averaged like 32 over that time, and Jason almost averaged a triple-double. It was incredible.
Yeah, you had Jacques Vaughn starting.
It was just what Vince needed to revitalize his career. He stagnated here the last year and a half in Toronto, partly because he was hurt, partly because the franchise was messed up. But it really reignited his passion for the game and put him in a perfect spot where Jason could take all the heat and make all the decisions, and Vince just had to play. And as a player, he had few parallels in the league back then.
No, everybody loved playing with Jason. Everyone.
Mm-hmm.
They just loved playing with Jason because all he cared about was winning and making sure his teammates were happy.
And Al, from a Nets perspective, again, the trade went down December 17th, 2005. The Nets were in Memphis, I think, when that went down. It took a little while for Vince to get on the court, but he eventually made his debut against Detroit about a week later.
Yep.
For Lawrence's perspective, and again, I know we're digging when we get this, but from Lawrence's perspective, he went from trying to keep the ship from totally breaking to now having to almost hit the reset button.
Yeah, it was great for them.
Yeah, for him, it was a very. Why didn't it work in the long term for Lawrence? Because you had Jason and two unbelievable wing players and a star like Kristich, who eventually got hurt during the 06-07 season. That put a little hamper on that. But why wasn't it really working when you have two great wing players and a great point guard like that?
Well, I think eventually Jason just said, we're not going to win. We're getting to the first round of the playoffs as he was getting older wasn't enough. He's still stung from the San Antonio series that they thought they should have won. We still look back, if you remember Game 6, why was Kerry Kittles on the bench in the fourth quarter most of the game? That could have gone a seventh game. And then, anything can happen. So obviously, we know the situation there. He wasn't a fan of Byron Scott. Let me go back. We were in Memphis, and I remember this because I got the call at shoot-around. And, Doug, you guys can appreciate this. When we used to go to Memphis, you'd go down that long tunnel or whatever you call it to the garage to get in for shoot-around. This is 2004. Worst cell service, right? My phone was ringing. Hello. I had a guy who was telling me that this was happening. And I couldn't speak to him until I got back to the hotel. And then I'm like, well, I guess I'm not getting barbecue today. I'm going to have to sit here and write stories all day about one of the biggest trades. And then you fast forward to his first game. And again, Doug can attest. Something happened. He was running, and it looked like he got shot. Like Vince was running down the court, and all of a sudden, I thought his hamstring blew, and he was out for the season. He fell on the floor, writhing in pain, reaching for his hamstring, and we're all like, this is it. This trade just blew up right now. He wound up playing 37 minutes that night, and that was Vince. You always thought he got hurt really bad, but then he would just, at least with the Nets, play through, give you 30 points, and it was phenomenal. It just didn't work out in the end because Jason had enough. I think he saw that he wasn't going to win anymore. They had gotten to, I think it was the conference semis the second year with Vince. First year they got swept by the Heat.
Yeah.
By the Heat. I think the second year they got to the conference semis, they lost there, and the wheels started falling off again in Jason's mind. He left, and then it became Vince's team because Richard got traded too. Yeah. Then it was Vince's team with Devin Harris.
Oh yeah, Devin. Yep.
And Vince was, he was still he had now embraced a different type of role. He was the veteran on this team. He loved Nenad Kristich. He loved Brook Lopez as a rookie. He loved him, and he was just trying to be. I say it all the time. Vince was one of the greatest guys I covered, and Doug will tell you that. He's just tremendous, just a tremendous guy.
Dallas, he was always fabulous.
Yeah, he would talk to us at the height of Vinsanity in like 2001. He would talk after every shoot-around, before every game, and after every game all year. Now, he might not say anything, But he would stand there and give the guys their sound bites, and he would give us a quote, and he did it unfailingly all the time. And
Never had an attitude.
I never had a problem with Vince, and I never will. And I'm very, very glad there was the fans came to embrace him in Toronto again at the end of his career. And I'm really glad he left on good terms with them. And I'm glad that he said 22 years. No one's ever going to play 22 seasons in the NBA again, ever. There's too much money. There's too much wear and tear. They start too young. It's not going to happen. And he's going to retire as the longest serving NBA player ever.
I think Kawhi Leonard, he's very durable. I think he might.
Look at him. If they load manage him for years from 12 to 16, he'll be all right.
I always tell this story about Vince because he lived about a mile from me where I live now.
Oh.
And there was one day my wife and I were in a gas station and Vince was right in front of us in the gas station. And I go to my wife, that's Vince Carter. She goes, why don't you go out and say hi? I said, I'm not going to bother. I'm not stalking him. I'm not doing anything like that. I'll see him tonight at the game. He looked in his side view mirror. He saw that it was me. He got out of the car, walked over and said hello to me, introduced himself to my wife. I mean, he just was a great, great guy.
Yeah, the 2000 Olympics in Sydney when he dunked over Frederick Weiss was, it was the height of insanity. It was craziness. And I covered those Olympics and covered the American team because Vince was on it. And after every game, he'd stand at the fence in the mix zone, and he would walk by and he would look for me, and he would come over and he would stand right in front of me. And that's when the rest of the crowd would come around and try to clamor him. But he looked and he recognized where the guy from Toronto was, and he went to me. And I give him all the credit in the world for that.
Beat guys love that. Beat guys love that stuff.
That's what feel important. Plus, you get your stuff.
Exactly.
He knows fight the other crowd to get it.
I have to ask this question because both of you guys were there. Vince's return to Toronto after the trade on TV, it was a spectacle. Just watching it.
I have never heard anger from 20,000 people like that since. I never will hear it again. It was terribly unfair, and it was absolutely brutal. And it was brutal for 8 years. But that first night was, oh my goodness, Al, you remember that night was like nothing you will ever experience again.
Ever. When LeBron went back, right? I wasn't there. I was watching on TV. And I know it doesn't really do it justice on TV. But I said, there's no way, even LeBron's first game back at Cleveland, everything he did, there's no way it was what it was like in Toronto.
No.
I don't believe it was. I was there for Carmelo's return to Denver. And remember, he forced his way out.
Yeah.
No.
Not even close. I was there for Jason Kidd's return to New Jersey after he forced his way out. It was a snowstorm that day, so it wasn't a full house, but you could also say the Meadowlands was never full. But It wasn't even close. Vince was destroyed from the moment he stepped on the court. And you remember the chant whenever they would do the defense chant or whatever, or let's go Raptors, VC sucks.
Yeah.
The whole building.
And they kept it up for years. Years they kept it up. And I'll tell you that here's the Vince angle that a lot of people don't realize. All those years when he was getting murdered in Toronto, the playoff series for 4 games in Toronto, he got killed all the time. All the regular season games. He never once lashed out. Never once said anything bad. He always said, I love Toronto. I love the city. I have great memories, great people in the organization I still stay in touch with. The city's great. I had a great time here. He never one time lashed out at the fans or the Raptors publicly. And I give him, because he could have killed them till kingdom come, but he never ever did.
One of the things too that I found very interesting, Al, and I was at the Meadowlands for a lot of the Vince's run, was how easy. Like after the trade, I think when his last season with Toronto before he got traded, he was averaging around 16 a game. That season, I remember when he first came to New Jersey, I was at the Boston. They were hosting Boston, and he lit them up for 42.
Yeah.
And I just remember watching him, and I'm sitting there saying to myself, how does Toronto let something like that happen? Like, that's my first thought at that point in time is, how do you let that happen? And Doug, you're giving us some insight about what was going on inside the organization at that point with all the turnover inside the front office. And Al, we've been through that a lot with the Nets with all the turnover in the front office as well. But it sounds like that happened because Vince sort of gave up on the franchise in its own way. He never said it publicly, but he sort of gave up on the
Well, he did say, he said it publicly that September before camp that he thought a trade would be best. I wrote the story. It was a huge deal. But he kind of went back on it once the season started. But they had decided they were going to move on. And the Raptors at that time had Rob Babcock is one of the nicest men you will have ever met in your life. And I will not speak ill of the dead. But he was overmatched as a general manager. He was overmatched by the personalities, people working for him. He was overmatched by the scope of Vince Carter and his value in the NBA. And he quit on Vince early. And he panicked and made a trade a month or 2 months before he had to. Now, the trade deadline wasn't the next day. He traded the guy in December. He could have waited till February. But he panicked and he made a trade because they wanted to move on. They wanted to go to a Chris Bosh-centered team. Maybe Jalen had some stuff left in him. But, Vince wanted out in September. Once he got around the team, he figured, okay, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. He kind of walked back the trade idea, but they had changed the way they played. He only averaged 16 in Toronto that first 20 games, but I think he took like maybe 40% of the shots he took the year before. He didn't have the ball as much. He could have got him 25 a night, but they were playing a different way. They were transitioning to Chris Bosh's team, and he felt it. And he felt a little bit hurt by it. Plus, it had been a long run at that time. It'd been 6 years. It's time to go. Let's make our move. Let's get a fresh start for everybody.
And Randy, let's remember this. He was playing with Jason Kidd. Jason Kidd made, when he came to the Knicks at the last end of his career, towards the end of his career, I would say to him, you made Richard Jefferson $78 million. You made Jason Collins, $24 million. You made Brian Scalabrine, $15 million. He made everyone around him better. Vince was already great, but imagine playing with a point guard like that who can get you open and get you the ball where you need to shoot it. To me, what was most impressive was when Richard wasn't on the floor, and like I said, at the end of the season when they were playing with those guys that, a lot of them were not in the NBA last year, the following year, or they were barely playing. All the defense was focused on Vince, and he still averaged 32.
Yeah. I think
he's such an amazing player. I covered him at the time in 2000, 2001. He was legitimately among the top 10 players on earth. I absolutely believe that, and I saw it up front, and I saw the comparables. There was a time in the early 2000s where no one knew who would be better, Vince or Kobe. And that was a legitimate discussion in the NBA. And as it turns out, the guy went on to win 5 championships because he played next to Shaquille O'Neal and for Phil. But that's the kind of talent Vince Carter was.
My favorite Jason Kidd quote was actually from Dirk. I'm sure it was during the finals. Dirk said, somebody asked him, what it was like playing with Jason Kidd. And he said, well, you have to be very aware of where you are, because if I am about to be open and I don't know it, I'll get hit in the face with the ball, because Jay Kidd will know that he knows I'm about to be open, and he throws the pass before I'm open. And the moment I'm open, I have to be ready. If I'm not aware that I'm about to be open, I'm getting hit in the face with the ball. And I thought that was the perfect, I don't know why it hasn't translated. Being a great player doesn't make you a great coach necessarily. We've seen many great players not make it as coaches, and maybe it will eventually do that. But as a player, I've never seen somebody you hear players talk about the game slowing down.
Yep.
I mean, for Kidd, it was practically like
it was incredible.
He knew everything that was going to happen. It was absolutely astounding.
He saw things we would marvel over the things he did.
Oh God, yeah.
Just unbelievable vision and knowing 2 or 3 steps ahead. Like they always talked about. He did. I think Nash was like that too.
Mm-hmm.
These guys, and that's why their teammates loved playing with them.
Yeah, and Vince was playing with Rafer Alston.
Right.
Oh my God. Some bad.
To put the finishing topics on this, the finishing touch on this conversation. guys, do we put Vince Carter in one of the top, maybe the top 10 great players never to win a championship?
Oh, for sure.
Oh, as skill wise, absolutely.
Yeah, there's a lot though. There's
Yeah,
a lot
there's
of great players who didn't win.
But Vince never played on a really, really good team. That 2001 team with Del Curry, Kevin Willis, Charles Oakley was great at that time. Antonio Davis was a beast. That was a really good team. If they beat Philly in the conference semifinals, I'm convinced they beat that Milwaukee team that had Ray Allen and Glenn Robinson and George Karl was a coach. I'm convinced they beat that, and Sam Cassell. I'm convinced they beat that team and they play for an NBA title against the Lakers. I don't know what happens, but that might have been one of the pivot points of the Vince Carter career. Is that if they get to the finals, now maybe everything unfolds differently in the next 3 years. But as a top 10 player to never win a title, like Al says, that's a huge list, but he'd certainly be in a conversation.
It's like who's MVP, or who's the GOAT? Who's the greatest player of all time? I can name 20 different guys, and you can't argue against, Will, Kareem, Michael, Kobe. You go down the list. I guess LeBron. You can say somebody else, but you can't argue against, whichever player you pick.
He's a great player who really maximized his ability, because look what he became at the end of his career.
You would have got $1 billion to 1 odds that he doesn't play 20 years in the NBA, and to play 22 and be quite happy and be just as effective in his 22nd year as he was in his 13th. Certainly not the same high flyer dunking every game, but he was a really good shooter, a really good player. And I'll tell you, talk to those kids who play for that Hawks team. The kids that play for that Hawks team that he was on, even in Phoenix, Dallas, they'll tell you he was a wonderful teammate.
Yeah,
a wonderful guy to be around, and a good teacher of the game, and a good role model for kids. And I swear, I talk to him often. He did the foreword for the book that I wrote, and I speak to him every couple of months, 3 months. And every time we speak, I go, man, I cannot believe he lasted 22 years. He goes, neither can I, but what the hell? They kept paying me and I wanted to play.
Yeah.
Kevin Willis was on with us, and we brought up Vince Carter. Kevin just had this infectious smile about Vince Carter. And he says, that's my little brother. And, look, guys, I will say this was, I know scheduling is a little crazy. Doug, I want to thank you both. If you start with Doug, we want to let everybody know where they can find you and find your work online.
You can do the Toronto Star, thestar.com. Smith Raps is the Twitter handle. And the book is We the North. It's Penguin Random House Canada publishing.
Yeah, I'm Newsday.com. The Twitter is Al. What is that called? The long dash on the bottom.
Underscore.
Al _ Iannazzon. Good luck spelling it.
Look at the screen. Just keep looking at the screen.
It's on the screen.
Guys, thanks so much for the time today. You were overly generous with your time. I'm glad we were able to put this together.
Yeah, it was a good time.
My pleasure. Yeah, great time.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
to see y'all. Good to see everybody.
You too.
All right, so that was Al Iannazzon, Doug Smith joining us. Doug Smith sounds like just a basketball player name. You know what I mean? Like, there was a Doug Smith that actually played in the league in the early 90s. I remember having the basketball card with his name on it.
I love the perspective that he gave. I got to know Vince here in Dallas, obviously, I would say at the end of his career, but he did play a long time after that. But he was still an impact player in Dallas. But I got to know him here. But to hear that the way that he made sure that the local guy, when they're in a situation in another country, and the class, the respect. I love the players. As someone who spent many, many years and worked with Doug in many situations, all-star games and summer league stuff and all that stuff where everybody's together. I got to know Doug and really respect him. But the players who understand that you have a job to do. This one thing about Greg Popovich, we need a quote from you about that. It's our job. And he often made it very difficult. But the players who understood, it's a beat writer. A beat writer needs you to talk about this narrow window of things for their story and run quickly and finish the story. I love the guys who got that, who respected it, who showed that deference to the guys who are working for a living. You know, the guys who are busting their butts to just cover the team night after night. I loved that story about how Vince was with them. It's fabulous.
Well, I think the whole conversation was good. We got some insight from Doug and from Al, and of course, you were able to bring the Dallas perspective. I was able to bring the perspective of what happened before Al was around with the Nets. So, Bill, let's real quickly preview what we have coming up on the Hardwood Huddle. We have some great episodes. We have Larry Brown's going to join us to talk about the 2004 Detroit Pistons. Mm-hmm. We have John.
Great team. I mean, top to bottom, one of the best teams ever. Right up there with the Lakers and the Celtics. Where it wasn't just one or two stars; it was just a group of incredible history.
And the next season, correct me if I'm wrong, all but Tayshaun Prince ended up making the All-Star team.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I thought. I was like, wait, the Utah Jazz are hands down the best team. Don't we need some Jazz players on the All-Star team like we had when of course, we need to see.
Nah, we don't need that.
Jazz have to prove it in the postseason, as Detroit did that year. But yeah, it's a great team to talk about. Lots of great stories.
We also have Shaq versus Kobe. We also going to be. We have John Michael, who's coming on with us again. We had him on last summer, and John Michael's going to come on, and we're going to break down the 2016 NBA Finals, the Golden State Warriors versus the Cleveland Cavaliers. We're going to talk about the awful 2000 draft, which Sports Illustrated and people inside the NBA say might be one of the worst draft classes of all time.
Worst pro draft of any sport ever.
It was bad. We're planning on doing a profile piece on Anthony Hardaway, Penny Hardaway, which is very, very good. And obviously we're going to be back doing this a little bit more. We'll have some more topics. We're going to have a good season of the Hardwood Huddle, taking you back in the annals of NBA time. I've always wanted to say it like that. The annals of NBA time. Bill, let everybody know where they can find you.
Well, I'm on Twitter at the Rocket Guy. If I write about basketball, it's backsportspage.com, and my personal blog, where I never write about basketball, is ishmaelslegacy.com.
And I'm on Instagram and Twitter at RandyBSP. Also, you can find backsportspage.com on all your social platforms and find this show, of course, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and everywhere you listen to your podcasting networks. Bill, till next week. Let's do it again in 7 days, and we'll rock it out.
Always a pleasure, my friend.
All right, we'll talk to you soon.